Did you guys start? I can't hear anything. Hello?
Hi, Margot. We were still muted. We're wait. Andy is on his way in, so we should be
Oh,
starting.
Oh, okay. I thought it was my equipment. Thank you.
We're good.
Thursday.
Okay, you're unmuted now.
Okay. ASD Governance Committee at 10:35 on Thursday. Somewhere towards the middle of January. Oh, is that right?
Yes.
Cool. Agenda. You. First.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
I was wondering if we could add old business to the agenda because I was hoping that if we had time, we could talk about the ones that got put in limbo last meeting.
That was the first item on the agenda.
Oh,
The parent notification.
no, it was the ones that regarded the ceremonies that church.
Really?
Yeah, well, the other were tabled to this meeting.
I remember tabling the parent notification of this meeting and specifically wanting it to be first.
Yeah, and I appreciate it.
Yeah,
Thank you. I'm grateful.
I can't recall.
Can you
Okay.
repeat? I'm sorry. Could you repeat the request? It's hard to kind of hear.
Request is for some tabled motions regarding, pardon me, observances, ceremonies, several other things, and I guess we did.
It was the Constitution Day,
Right.
Declaration of Independence of June 19th, Juneteenth, and Veterans Day and 9/11.
Yeah.
I have.
So, yeah, well, I was gonna say,
Oh,
I do remember we tabled until the next meeting. This isn't the regular meeting. It is a special meeting, specifically.
No, this is regular.
This is regular. Okay. I'm not.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
I was looking at my notes from the last meeting on the 7th, and it said that the national anthem item was tabled until a March 24 response by administration.
Oh, March, okay, sorry.
Yeah, I thought.
Thank you.
So actually, all of them were tabled so that we could go and do a study and figure out exactly what we have. We're gonna give an update on March 24th. With the understanding that it's probably a big project that was probably gonna be finalized into June.
Thank you very much. I withdraw mine.
That has been started in motion.
Right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I remember that clearly now.
We've got several holidays in between then.
Yeah. So the first item on the agenda is the parent notification proposal by Member Donnelly, and I believe we're still waiting for a second on that. But I would say I think there's some structural flaws in it. I don't. Well, I'll second it for purposes of discussion. And got my copy right in front. So one of the things that I think is, well, let me open the floor for discussion first of all.
Thank
Would
you.
you like to speak?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. What it would do is reverse the existing presumption against notifying parents of changes to students' legal name or pronouns to a presumption in favor of notifying parents unless the superintendent believes there's some articulatable reason not to notify the parents. So it just would be reversing the existing presumption against telling parents about it for secondary students.
I have a
Number one.
question. There was an interesting article, I think yesterday or the day before in the New York Times about some of the laws that have been implemented, I think, in Florida, and it's hard for nurses to give a Band-Aid right now. This is not that, this is not this. That is not this. But when in the first sentence of the second paragraph, I'm just wondering what happens if a student communicates they wish to be addressed differently than their legal name, but not a change of the pronoun. Right now, there's an and linking two student desires.
You're right, it should be and or.
So I just wondered what your stance on that would be.
Yeah, yeah, you're right, that conjunctive is probably requires both an and, it should be and or. Because it could apply in either case where they wanted just a different name than their legal name or a pronoun that's different than their assigned pronoun in birth.
And we'll take that as a grammatical change to the proposal.
Good catch.
Mike, I've got a couple of problems, and one of them is that if a student approaches a teacher or a staff member, and that person feels like confidentiality is important, they've got to somehow work a request up the chain of command to the superintendent, who then has to bring it to the board. And I'm not sure if this would be something we consider an executive session. I know we want to. And technically it's student information, so possibly it would be. But then the board would have to make a decision, and then it would have to work its way back down to the staff member. And of course, if the student had said something and the decision comes back a few weeks later that we're not going to keep it confidential, it just, to me, creates an incredibly awkward situation for staff and for the student. And I'll say, I think in the vast majority of cases where this is happening, parents are aware, but there are some cases where they're not. And in some cases, it's bad behavior by a student. In other cases, it's a legitimate behavior. I really feel like that kind of thing has to be considered at the school level, and considered really quickly. I'm going to say that's one of my critical things right at the moment. It also, I think I asked it in the last meeting, if Patricia wants to be called Pat, or Patrick wants to be called Pat, does that need parental approval? I mean, like, it's one thing if they want to switch to something presumptively the other gender, but if they want to switch to something that's ambiguous. I was a student, I'm already going by Andy rather than Andrew, but if I want to spell it with an I, does my mom need to say that's okay? I just think this puts a very complicated, this complicates something that's complicated enough already. And I also do want to take exception. I don't think the existing policy encourages people not to report. It simply opens the avenue, recognizes that in some cases you would not. So for all those reasons, I would not support this. Any other discussion? Any comments from staff or?
Mr. Chair? Oh,
Yeah.
there's my hand.
Anyone?
Anyway, thank you. So first of all, the guidelines are administrative guidelines. It's not our policy. The intent is to provide guidance, and I do believe that the administration will review, and once we get the new guidance, I guess, from the I don't know if it's the Office of Civil Rights, Education or whatever, but I know that that's coming. And it could influence these administrative guidelines. But I share similar concerns as have already been mentioned. My given name is Margaret. I prefer Margot because I'm comfortable with that. And to create a situation where that's going to be handled I mean, I think all the information is available to parents in the system. They can check it at any time. And I guess that's one of the things I'd like to hear from administration. What is it that is hit? Is there anything hit? What are the, have we had challenges regarding these particular points? Have there been, I guess, issues with families, with kids? I'm just trying to understand why we keep coming back to this every year, if not twice a year, regarding the administrative guidelines and how to work with our transgender and gender nonconforming students. So for reasons already stated, I can't support it, although I don't have a vote on this committee, because I think the committee people are already in the room or online. So, but I would like to hear from the administration. What kinds of concerns, complaints have you gotten? You know, I'm just not sure why we have to complicate this any more than what it is for right now. So if anyone from the administration has any highlights.
Superintendent, right?
Sure, a few points. Number one, I'm not personally aware of any situations that have bubbled as a result of this policy as they affect transgender students. Personally, I'm not aware of any, but I want to give an opportunity. if we're aware.
I haven't heard of any. I haven't been dealing with it.
Right, so this is not a widespread issue, pragmatically speaking. So that's the first point. Number two, I don't intend to make any adjustments to the administrative guidelines until we do hear from the Department of Education, the federal level, their Office of Civil Rights, because I do think that we should give a thorough review of what they have to say before we make a call one way or another. And I think my third point would be with regard to technology. I think that's a really good question. My understanding is that parents have access to all records at all times. Is that correct, Mike?
Yeah, yep, through both FERPA as the law and then online, we also make that demographic information available. So whether it be their preferred pronouns or things like a cell phone number, the parent actually has to put that information in to the system. The child can't do that. And so they are aware, if that's in the system, they are aware that it's there, or have access to it from a parental standpoint.
So in other words, parents have 24-hour access to records as they relate to their child. So that's the third point I want to clear up. And four, it's correct by Member Donnelly and others that right now this rests as an administrative regulation. It's of course the will of the board to create policies that address this that would supersede the administrative guidelines. However, I do want to remind the board that I provided on November 10th legal review of all the pending litigation on this topic. If you have copies, if board members would like to re-review that. But all of that to say that this is a situation that's being discussed nationally, and I would put a lot of thought into any policy changes on this topic, just because one, some are being dismissed, some are not being heard, but most likely it will end up in the Supreme Court. So any policy change on this topic is something that the board would need to very heavily weigh.
Any other comments?
Could I ask for a clarification? Mike, he said it's up to parents to put in the system. So does the district use a pronoun or a nickname that's not put in the system by the parents?
So there are two entities that can change that demographic data at a school level. One is the parent and the other is the front office. And so the principal, front office staff can make changes to that system, but a student can't, for instance, go in and put a cell phone number in the system that everybody can see. A parent actually does that can put that demographic information in or change it. And front office staff, the reason they can make those changes is for multiple reasons, but a parent might call, they identify the parent, they may send an email and say, we want to change this particular information for a child, but they don't go online and do it themselves.
But could a front office make that change without telling the parents that they made
Certainly, yes, certainly they could. But then the parent would immediately see it if they go online. So it's transparent to the parent.
Any other questions, comments, clarifications? Seeing none, I'll call for a vote on it. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
I believe Member Jacobs is online.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I'd propose we table this until such a time as we receive updated guidance from our federal partners, since that's what these regulations are based on. My understanding is that should be coming within the next few months. Any decision on this topic, as the superintendent alluded to, is probably premature given the legal landscape.
I would take that as a move to table. Is there a second? Hearing none, the move to table fails. Did you want to vote yay or nay on the motion?
If the committee isn't interested in tabling, then I'm a no vote.
And I would vote no as well. I think there are things that need to change regardless. So seeing that the motion fails. And
Could I just ask one question?
Member Donald?
Do you know if these guidelines are based on existing federal guidelines? I've never heard that argument before, and I don't know.
My understanding is that these were based off of interpretations at the time, back in 2015, based off of Title IX guidance at the time, or Title IX conversations at the time, was my understanding, but I'm not aware as to what documents were used and the initial guidelines were adopted by ASD and other districts.
Yeah, right. If I can speak to that.
President Bellamy?
Yes, this would have been the 15-16 school year. I don't think our guidelines came out until probably 2016. They were vetted through legal. And again, they were also presented to the school board at that time. Because that was my office that worked on these with other legal and other staff. So yes, you can go back and look. I mean, I don't know. I mean, this is not something that was just made up out of the blue. As I recall, it was a template. You will see similar policies or guidelines throughout districts, and that cover the same items. So yeah, they weren't made up, and they weren't arbitrary. They were according to the guidance at the time.
Testify before that, we just wandered in the dark.
Margot, was it federal guidance or what
Yes,
was the source of it?
it was the federal, it's from the Department of Education, Office of Civil Rights.
Thank you.
Any other questions, discussion? If not, on to item 2, access to district records. And I assume someone from the administration wishes to speak.
Yes, so this came from the administration. We wanted to propose some potential revisions to board policy as it relates to requests for public records. So I'll hand it off to Mike Fleckenstein and
Good morning, Mike Fleckenstein. I'm the district's Chief Information Officer. And the ASD administration is here to submit proposed revisions to 3 board policies. We're seeking revisions to board policies to facilitate public's timely access to ASD documents while also reducing administrative and financial burdens on ASD. The revisions are proposed to 3 policies, but they really fall into 2 buckets. One is email retention and the other are public records requests. ASD asked the board to update its policies regarding email retention to adopt a modern, efficient method of retention. ASD asked the board to update its policy regarding public records requests to permit ASD to reduce the burdens these requests impose on ASD and to promote quicker and more valuable responses to the public. We'll begin with the public records policy and then turn to the records retention and email use policies. Please allow me to introduce Mr. Lee Baxter. You guys, I think most of you guys know Lee. Lee's worked with us and this team to help craft the changes. We're asking you to move to the full board today. Lee will begin by walking through the relevant laws that surround both of these subjects, and then we'll look at the actual policies and the changes to the policies that we're proposing. With that, I'll turn it over to Lee.
Thanks, Mike. Chair Hallman, members of the board, President Bellamy online. As Mr. Fleckenstein mentioned, we've been working for some time on updating the policies of the board, proposing revisions to the board policy regarding email retention of public records. Unlike some topics like academic freedom or something like that that are timeless, technology changes and access to records. We think that access to records and how we go about that needs to change as well. These changes are meant to promote efficiency and to expedite responses to both legal subpoenas and public records requests. As Mr. Fleckenstein mentioned, we'll start with 1340, and our proposed revisions fall into 2 buckets: public records and archiving of ASD email communications. So we're starting with the public records issue, and that is the board's policy is board policy 1340, but quickly we'll go over what the state of play is for the law so that we can have a discussion if you'd like about how these changes, what we're speaking to and how they fall into the legal framework. Like the federal system, we throw these terms around quite a bit. You'll hear FOIA. FOIA stands for Freedom of Information Act. That actually applies to federal agencies. If you were going to send in a request, say, to the Department of Education Civil Rights Division, that would be a FOIA. For state entities and municipal entities, we have state law, and that is Alaska's Public Records Act. Alaska's Public Record Act has been on the books essentially since the early 70s and has remained largely unchanged since then. It broadly allows anyone, any member of the public, to have access to state and local government records unless those records are specifically exempted by the Alaska Public Records Act. As I mentioned, this has been in place since the late 70s, but it actually predates this. Alaska has had a Public Records Act since statehood. It was just in the form of legal case law and not the statute. when discussing this, it's important to remember that the legislature, Alaska's legislature, has expressed a bias in favor of disclosure of records. So as we're discussed, as ASD works its way through public records and produces them, we always keep that in mind, and we should keep that in mind for this discussion as well. The right to public records, however, is not absolute or does not mean that someone is entitled to them within a certain amount of days or absent any charges. And in fact, ASD is one of the very, very few entities that I have seen that tries to produce almost all records at no cost. There are state regulations that apply to state agencies that require absent extraordinary circumstances for records to be produced within 10 days. That does not apply to school districts. That does not apply to municipalities. That applies within the within state administrative agencies. So that's important to remember. One of the express exemptions of public records is FERPA protected information. So the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act of 1974 codified the right to keep educational records private, which students attend, student identities, student educational like grades, anything mentioning the student is not to be produced to members of the public. That's for pretty obvious reasons that we're dealing with minors here. So I mentioned that there's a legislative bias in favor of disclosure unless something is specifically exempted by the act. One of those explicit exemptions listed by the statute is any record covered by FERPA. That's to say that federal law and state law require ASD to make sure that that information is not disclosed in response to a Public Records Act. Our proposed revisions to the board policy generally do a couple things. Number one, it makes explicit what the Muni and what I've seen other state agencies do, which is make it clear that ASD can charge if we receive a broad, untargeted public record request. You'll see when we go over the specific language, if it's a small, targeted, appropriate and non-burdensome request, we're not going to charge anything. And that's based on a timeline of how long it would take to produce the records. However, if it exceeds and becomes very burdensome, we urge that ASD, like all other public entities, should recoup some of these costs. So I think with that, Mike, unless there's more to be added to that, I think we should go to the specific red lines, perhaps, of Board Policy 1340. So in the packet that you should all have, there is a white paper legal memorandum that outlines the law at issue here that must guide our either revision or non-revision of board policy. Also is the a red line version, I believe, of there's a red line version in the packet, red line version of what our proposed changes are. So anything that's highlighted, it looks like it's in blue. Anything highlighted in blue is a proposed revision, and anything that's in black text is what's currently in the board policy. So let's go to, unlike email archiving, we have all of our board policies for public record requests in one board policy list. So this was a little bit easier to deal with. We are not going to we don't propose any changes to the first paragraph. That is a reflection. The first paragraph is a truism, is what the state of the law is, which is we recognize that there's a state policy that provides broad public access to district records, and public access shall not be given to records that are exempted or required to be kept confidential by state or federal law. The next paragraph, which we are proposing to add, is going to be a codification of both what we believe should guide district public records responses, which is that we should do them as quickly and efficiently as possible. The school district is a public entity. We have obligations to the public, and we need to produce records as expeditiously as we can. And so that's reflected in the first, maybe I'll read through this and then we'll go through that. That's a better way to go about it. So it is the policy of the Anchorage School District to provide the fullest and most rapid public access to district records and information so that the right of the people to remain informed is protected. The district shall, consistent with the orderly conduct of district business, make a good faith and diligent effort to provide a rapid and intelligible response to any public records request within a reasonable time period, while protecting from disclosure records exempted from disclosure by federal, state, and municipal law. There is no specific number of days from the date of a request in which the district must produce responsive documents. The time it takes for the district to complete a request and provide responsive records will vary depending on the complexity of the request and any backlog of requests already pending at the district. However, within 2 business days of receiving a record request, the district shall confirm in writing to the requester that the district has received the request. So that proposed language does a few things. We've seen, the administration has seen a lot of the people who request records target them at multiple entities. And so they get used to getting records from, say, the state. And the state has a certain timeline that they're supposed to, the state agencies have a certain timeline that they're required to produce records in. That timeline is 10 days. That does not apply to municipal entities, and it does not apply to the Anchorage School District specifically. And that, we believe, should be put into board policy so people understand that. And so we don't get into this back and forth. When we receive a public record request, what we should not be arguing about is the details of how long we have to respond and when we need to get records out. If the more of that's in board policy, the more of that we can put behind us and work on actually providing the responsive materials. We believe the board should recognize and adopt this language in the policy that says that we will work diligently and expeditiously within a reasonable time period to provide those records, because that is what state law requires. And the 2 business days language at the end is something that's both in the state statute and something that is important to do to be a responsive public entity. That last line, however, within 2 business days of receiving a record request, the district shall confirm in writing to the requester that the district has received the request. That's a prudent thing to do, because when we receive a request, it's like sending an email and no one responds. You don't know if they got it. We owe it to the public to let them know, hey, we got your request, working on it, and that lets them know that we have received it. So that's that paragraph does a few things, but it makes explicit, specifically, it makes explicit that there is no day specific amount of days that we have to respond. However, we have an obligation to do a good faith and expeditious disclosure, and it also explains to the public that the time it will take is based on practical concerns, how many public records requests we have in the backlog, how big of a scope you've requested. If you requested 6 years of records, if you requested 1 month of records, so the complexity of the request, and also makes clear that we will, the administration has an obligation to let the requester know within 2 days that we received your request and are working on it. The bottom part of this, and I work for a couple different school districts, and just as an aside, these school board policies are always interesting. Unlike statute, I have, A, and then 1, 2, 3 under A, and then B, and then 1, 2, 3, organized by topic and subject matter. Policies are kind of, they kind of state thoughts as you move down. So the reason I'm saying that is we are not wedded to any particular order that these proposed revisions go in. There was not deep thought put into, well, this one should go before this one. Any discussion like that. So why this is at the end, no reason other than it was a new area for the board policy, and we thought that it should go at the end. So this part makes clear when this part, if adopted by the board, lets the public know and guides the administration on when it can charge for copying and production costs. And as I mentioned earlier, we are, administration believes that for small targeted requests, there should be no costs, and that we should produce those without having any kind of cost passed on to the requester. However, we are seeing, just in my time working on these, we are seeing a vast broadening of these public records requests, and they are becoming extremely burdensome. If you want to hear about some of those examples, we can talk about that. Yeah.
I had a
Otherwise,
question. I'm not a member of the committee, but I did have a question. So if somebody were to read this and say, okay, I've got 5 person hours this month, I can ask a similar question next month for 5 hours, and the month after that. That's 60 hours of time over a year. I just wonder if the district should be a little bit more defensive than 5 hours a month, because somebody could say, could create a broad query and then strategically dice it up into smaller pieces over the course of the year, which still takes 60 hours or more of staff time, which is expensive.
That's true. That's something that the board should certainly consider. Would be,
It's like,
I have not seen, I will defer to Mike, he sees more of these than I do, but I have not seen someone do that kind of gamesmanship yet, but
I will say there are people that will do records requests, and then from that records request do another, and then from that one do another, and then from that one do another, and then from that one do another. So they'll stack them up and continually do them. That does happen over time. Many of those are very broad requests, and so they end up being not just 5 hours, but thousands of hours, hundreds of hours. And so there are, yes, that absolutely does happen. What I'd be curious about, Lee, and I think something we should look into is that from a statute perspective, I think the 5 hours ties to the request. And so that would be a piece we would have to review.
that's right. So
I would be interested in knowing whether there's a way to tie a limit to a person, maybe on a calendar year basis. I don't know, and that's is that for one request total? I mean, it's the production of record. I don't know, maybe I think I want a little bit more of a specific delineation of what can be offered to an individual to respond to their interest in a reasonable way, but putting some boundaries on it beyond 5 hours a month, which could be 60 hours a year.
I think my question was, the state has a delay provision specific, if they give the notice, they can delay for another 30 days or something like that. And I was thinking that might relate to the member Lesson's inquiry, but no, I don't think it does, because her inquiry is really based on the concept of a serial records request.
remember, if I could go back to that real quickly, I will say that limiting each requester and it bears on this discussion that nobody's saying that you can't do a broad public record request. You just have to chip in and provide. ASD is providing education to Alaska's, Anchorage's youth. They're not supposed to be sitting there and spending a month trying to sort through 5 years of emails for I don't know what purpose. Limiting each requester to, happy to go back and look at that and see if there's a way to make it more specific and tie to each requester, but I'll say that limiting every requester's free time for public records requests to 60 hours a year being approved. Because we are working more hours than that on several requests. Many.
And you have to remember, sort of in the law at the state level, there isn't a reasonableness clause to the request. It doesn't say your request has to be reasonable in any way. The reasonable, sort of the piece that makes things be able to be reasonable is the dollar amount that you tie to it. And so that's really sort of the mechanism that we have to use to help people be reasonable. And we want to do that, right? We want to help folks target their specific records requests. I end up handling most all of the email ones with the team. And so I literally reach out to folks on the phone and have long discussions with them about what are you looking for? How can we help you get that, so that we can target it down to a reasonable amount of records that gets them the information that they want, but doesn't unload 48,000 pages of information on them, which is sort of at the end of the day useless to everyone involved. And so this really is an effort for us to try to help have that conversation, especially if folks don't want to have that conversation. How do we have this conversation to help you get what you're after?
Would we need to add a provision, say if the superintendent felt like it was in the public interest to waive these? Or
That's a very good idea. I can think of several scenarios where that may be appropriate. So that's probably a wise provision to include that. If the superintendent determines it's in the ASDs or the public interest way that needs in any circumstance, he or she can do so. That would probably be a wise escape valve to have in there.
any other questions? Online, anybody have questions?
All hands raised.
Yeah, personally, I see this as beneficial. I think it's remarkable we've been doing free. And that we haven't been tagged with massive requests from people that are just frustrated or irritated with us. I'm inclined to vote yes on this, with the idea there are a couple of ideas to modify it further. And those modifications could be made in the future, but I see no reason not to support this as it's presented today. See a problem with it. Any other questions or comments? Seeing, hearing none, I'll put it to a vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Shouldn't be, since there are only 3 people. That is passed, and we're on to item 3. Oh,
Member Wilson is joining online.
thank you very much. And again, to the administrative comment.
Lee, yeah, the same. These go hand in hand.
Okay.
I went back and looked just for some color here on the history of these proposed revisions. I went back and looked at when we started looking at this, and I don't have the exact day and month, but it's the first legal memorandum that firm I work for provided on these issues was 2017. So we have been working for a while on these issues, and we've been pushing this for a while. COVID interrupted that, but these 2 issues are interrelated. So we're about to go into email archiving. This is directly corresponds to the public records request, because what we're seeing mostly for public records requests, at least the ones I'm involved in, Mike handles a lot by himself, but the ones I'm involved in are for emails. And currently, ASD is archiving every email sent to or from an ASDK12.org email address dating back roughly 13 years. Back to, it's actually pushing 14. I wrote this memo back in 2013, so it's pushing 14 years now. Mike, could you give us a scope of how many emails are sent to and from before I started into this?
Yeah, so over that time period from 13 to now, we average 400,000 a day. Now many days we push over 1 million a day. And so just to put that into a little bit of context that might be relatable, right? This first part, maybe not. We hold 304 terabytes worth of email at the data center that's duplicated. So what does that look like? If somebody were to request all of that email and we had to go through and redact it, it would take 307 people their entire lifetime to look through it. It's 208 million hours of work. And if you were to sit down and have your full job be watching Netflix movies, it would take you 137 work years of movies without a break to watch the amount of data that we store from our email. Netflix only has 3,600 movies online, and you're going to have to watch 201,000 of those, so it's going to get a bit old after the first couple of years. So that's sort of the magnitude of the amount of records that we have in there. That's 225 billion plus pages of records.
So you're saying everything older than 15 years is gone?
No, there's still some stuff that's in there. I mean, there's still, because there are still people that were around longer than that still have in their mailbox. We don't journal anything past that. Journal means that every email that comes in, we take a forensic copy of it that we could be used in court. That system didn't start until 13 years ago, but there are people, myself included, that have worked here longer than that still have email in their email boxes from before. But I didn't look at those numbers.
So we've been journaling everything since 2010. Yeah.
Number dollars.
So this capstone approach, is there some computer program that weeds out those?
Yeah, so we will generate email policies that will, we already have all of this information in the system to make these decisions about. So we will actually go in and create archiving policies, is what they're called in Microsoft's system, that says, if you fall into this particular group of people, you're retained for this amount of time. If you fall into this group of people, you're retained for this amount of time, this people for this amount of time. And it will be position aware. So if we move positions, if somebody moves from, and you have to think about sort of some of these complexities, they move from being a teacher or to a principal, and then from a principal to an administrator, and then a chief. Those archival rules that fit for them will apply for the period of time that they are in that role. So if you are ever a superintendent under our proposal here, and all of your email during that time frame of your superintendent will be kept indefinitely. If you're ever a school board member, your time as a school board member would be kept indefinitely. So that's how the sort of physical mechanism or software mechanism works.
How long, sorry,
Mr. Race?
how long do we archive educator, anybody who's contacting students, parents?
Our proposal is 3 years. And we'll go through that as we go through the proposal. It actually spells out the retention schedule.
The reason I wanted everyone to have the members and everyone else to understand is we're dealing with a world of data here that is basically unimaginable. Sitting out there in a server somewhere is maybe hundreds of millions of ASD emails. We're paying for that. And we're also having to search through year after year of million emails to pull public records requests. That has become so burdensome that I think that for one of our requests, you couldn't even do it. So this feeds it, the reason we brought these together is because the email archiving implicates our responses to public records because so much time is spent on these. So we'll jump back into the practical considerations, but real quickly to go over the state of the law here, we have an Alaska state statute that requires government entities, state government entities and state agencies to follow there's a big long manual of how to retain records. The law specifically says that school districts must promote the principles of efficient records management. That efficient word isn't doing a lot of work today. For local public records kept in accordance with state law, school districts shall, as far as practical, follow the program established for management of state records. And there's an important caveat in that section. So it's as far as practical. I work for some rural school districts. I'll say ASD's record retention is head and shoulders above what some of those districts are able to do. But that's a matter of practicality. Some of these rural school districts don't have the capacity. They don't have a Mike Fleckenstein or a Jack Johnson. They've got a superintendent who wears, I call them the CEOs. They do everything from fighting contractors on site, or not fighting, arguments with contractors for construction, to contacting OSHA, to doing all those things. So state law recognizes that school districts are not like state agencies. Our main purview is to educate the youth. And so our archiving shall follow state record management policies as far as practical. That's important. So records that have to be archived is a little bit of a circular definition, frankly. Everything that the definition of what must be retained under the state model is essentially records that have archival value. You shall archive records that have archival value. There will be difference of opinions about what is a record of archival value between different people. But the main takeaway from the law is that state law requires us to follow, as far as practical, what the state model retention schedule provides. The state puts out a big booklet of different records and how long they should be retained for. This model retention schedule does not have a section for emails, which is very unfortunate. Instead, it's based on what the substance of the email is. So that becomes pretty difficult. We provide some examples here. So training program records, they recommend you keep for 3 years, then destroy. Insurance claim records, risk management type things, 7 years, and destroy. Risk factor evaluations, 4 years, and destroy. The only time email is actually mentioned in the model retention schedule, specifically where it actually says the word email, is in the transitory or miscellaneous administrative information. And that provision talks about transitory records, how those need not be retained at all because they are essentially like water. What you would 15, 20 years ago, they're the conversations that you have in the hallway. Hey, how's your wife doing? Do you want me to order you lunch? Do you want to walk down to this in-service meeting together? Things that you would 20 years ago walk across the hall and talk about, we now send emails about. So those are what transitory records are. So when we looked into this issue of how to get this giant weight off of ASD's, the IT department's back, and ASD generally, there's 2 ways to go about keeping email records. We'll call it the each person does it themselves method, or there is what's called the capstone approach. The capstone approach has been adopted by the National Archives as the modern, efficient way of records management. Capstone approach requires retention of records based on who's sending and receiving them, the originator of the record, as opposed to going on a record by record basis and determining which bucket it should fall into as far as 3, 4, 7, 2 years. We looked at those two different approaches, and all of us came to this, I will say the team, all of us came to the same conclusion, which is the everybody on their own approach was not feasible. Teachers already have, most of the employees at the Anchorage School District are teachers. They send a lot of emails. We see them, those emails popping up in our public records requests in response to subpoenas. Teachers probably don't have the time to sit down every day and go through the 50-page model retention schedule and categorize which, you know, which category the email falls into. So we looked at the capstone approach, and the capstone approach is what, I won't say all, but the vast majority of entities that are modernizing their record retention schedules and policies are adopting. And like I said, that approach archives records based on the originator and recipient of records, and the higher up you go, the longer records are retained. So we propose to get rid of this 304 terabytes of emails dating back to 2010. The following, we would ask the governance committee to pass out or to pass this proposed board policy and have the full board consider adoption of a capstone approach. That capstone approach has ASD personnel falling into 3 categories. The school board members and the superintendent, you're on the hook forever. You are the board creates policy and the superintendent executes the policy. I think there's a very good argument that there's those records should be retained forever. Those have most value historically and current. So that we thought permanent retention of those records would be wise. For the chiefs who are helping the superintendent execute the board's policy, 6 years, and for all other employees, 3 years. The 3-year mark was chosen because of state law statute of limitations. For tort matters, it's 2 years. For contracts, it's 3. And thought it was prudent to retain all emails at ASD for at least 3 years, such that if we have any issue arise regarding a lawsuit or something like that, we have 3 years of emails completely. Also factor, practical considerations of parents needing to know things about their students' history, due process complaints in the SPED setting. 3 years is a prudent amount of time to retain all years and or to retain all emails. And while that will still be a large storage of archived emails, it's a vast improvement on what we have now, which is everything always forever. It bears noting here that our proposed new email retention it should have no effect on, it should not have any effect on what we're already doing for holds for legal claims. So when risk management receives notice, either principal or from a chief, superintendent. Risk management goes about saving records. I've been personally involved in saving surveillance footage, emails, things like that for records. So this email retention schedule does not implicate risk management's procedures for legal holds. So that is the law and generally what our proposed revisions do. Walk through those red lines as well, if that's helpful for
Yep,
folks.
3580 red lines.
Remember, Leslie, if you had an immediate question, I think.
Well, I was gonna say, I have a separate like muni budget meeting that I am supposed to
Oh,
log on
okay.
to momentarily, but I had one. If I wanted to speak to
Absolutely.
this, and I am not a member of the committee, so this would be, it's rare that my prior background and school board overlap, but trained as a historian and
Oh, really?
yes, so it's really exciting. Like, I love that you're studying at the National Archives in here.
That makes
We
fun of, that makes fun of us.
Yeah. So that said, in the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the 5th paragraph down where it says the board authorizes the destruction of records having no legal or administrative value or historical interest. I take serious issue with the phrase or historical interest because historians are able to use archives in all sorts of wonderful and creative ways. You could have some gung-ho graduate student working on relationships and mentoring among teachers who might find the ephemera of let's go out to lunch today actually a really valuable piece of information. I'm making this up right now as I go along, but I'm just telling you that there are academics who would find information of historical interest. So I understand the fiduciary responsibility that I play right now as a member of the board. And for that reason, I would support retaining the phrase, authorized the destruction of records having no legal or administrative value, but I would ask the committee to consider striking or historical interest, because I think that's a subjective designation.
Yeah.
And I did notice that the Seattle Public Schools actually has a trained archivist as part of their staff. On my first tour of the warehouse, I was like, oh, there are the boxes of all the old records. I thought it was very exciting. There was an amazing podcast a few years ago from the New York Times called Nice White Parents that used like 60 years of New York City school archival records. So there's great value in the stuff. Just don't call it no historical.
That's a valid-
interest. And I also think, and I just, and I'm gonna step out, I think it's really great that school board member and superintendent documentation produced materials will be saved indefinitely, because anybody could look at, say, prior administrative perspectives on something like the base student allocation and see how that has or has not changed over time. So I'm thinking about like everything is metadata, basically, so you can search for anything. And if you wanted to know how administrators since the BSA was conceived have discussed it, you could probably get a terabyte of information about that. So anyways, I think it's really exciting. Just somebody strike the word no historical interest.
I'll move this along. I move to
Thank you.
strike the words or historical interest
Thank you so much, sir.
from the next to the bottom paragraph. First page of the
3580.
I'll second that. I will say, as someone working in technology with the district back in the turn of the century, I spent a lot of time talking to staff members, trying to convince them that they needed the different email address for themselves. Because people in the 90s working for the district had an email address, and then it started to become much more widespread in use. So there's a lot of letters to mom, there's like medical information, there's literally thousands of teachers and other staff members use their ASD email address for everything. They did on email for years.
One of our
I'm
change.
sure if you still did. Just raise his hand and say he did.
I just say, is this stuff, because it's all Google, is this like indefinitely like obtainable through Google anyways? Like,
It's not Google. This is all a Microsoft's Exchange application. And so no, I mean, if we stop paying them, then we will pull all of this information out of that system and move it into whatever the new system is, or into an archival system, one of the two.
But so everything, since we've been with Microsoft, it can be found. I mean, are they storing all this stuff as well then?
So yes,
Yeah, I mean, it's redundant, right?
Yeah. we have multiple, actually multiple spots where they're at.
Any other comments or questions? Yeah, before us is the amendment to strike historical. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Member Dunn. Member Jacobs says aye. Member Jacobs, you have your hand up?
Not regarding the amendment. Are we past the amendment?
I believe there was another voice online that thought might be asking for the floor.
Yes.
And not hearing it, yes, the amendment passes and we are back on the main motion.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. How does the proposed retention schedule for 3 years specifically, it seems like it covers most employees, differ from the municipalities? And if that was covered somewhere, I apologize for missing it.
I do not know what the municipality of Anchorage is doing for its email retention. Mike Fleckenstein did talk to some, maybe you could provide some color on what other school districts you've seen.
Yeah, so I spent some time both looking at the state's version of it as we fall under their Records Retention Act. And then I also went out to my peers at CGCS schools and asked them about what they were doing on this front. And for the most part, all of them asked if they could have copies of what we do once we get done, because they're in a very similar boat to us and it's very burdensome. And then I did find a couple of districts that have gone either way, like with Capstone or with everybody puts it in their own bucket. The everybody puts it in their own bucket has ended up at the district I talked to being almost worthless, because you could think about 10 people on a single email chain, how they might classify it differently. And so then when a request comes in, well, this person had it, but that person didn't. This person said it was this, that person said it wasn't. And then from a capstone approach, I did not put together a chart of what each of the groups used from a time period. We instead looked at what we saw as law in Alaska and from our past both legal cases and public records requests to come up with a schedule that we thought was broad enough to encompass the largest amount of the types of requests that we get, and covered the legal aspects of the requests that we get from a statute of limitations. And that's how we determined this schedule.
Member Jacobs.
Mr. Chair, could have. Sorry, go ahead, sir.
Member Jacobs?
No, I apologize. I cut someone off. I do a follow-up, but I cut someone off, so please continue.
You have the floor, Member Jacobs.
Okay, great. So I guess my follow-up to that is, you know, I did some searching, and the state seems to have retention schedules anywhere from 30 days to 22 months to 5 years for certain items. The municipal code has a requirement that a retention schedule be set, but didn't seem to have one readily available, or at least within quick reach anyway. I feel like those pieces of information seem relevant, just for context, if nothing else. So I guess I'm hopeful we can get that information. Until we do, I'm not sure that I would want to move forward, but I tend to like to see those contextual dots of data for reference. So that would help me, I think. And so if we could, I guess my ask would be, unless there's more information that can be readily obtained very quickly here in the meeting, my preference would be to continue the conversation here after knowing a bit more. Thank you.
Member Jacobs, is that preference so strong that you would make a motion?
Well, I'm interested in hearing how other board members, both on and off the committee, feel. If there's similar, we typically have these meetings fully staffed with board members. So if there's a board member who wants to vote on this right away, the committee has a long-standing policy of not getting in the way of the will of the majority of the board when that's been expressed. And so if my opinion is a lone opinion, then that's certainly fine. But I haven't heard too many folks weigh in either way. So thanks.
Member Donald?
I think it's a fair request to know that.
If I could, we could also provide you with that information in short order in Board Connect as well. So that you would have that. I don't want to speculate. I did look at all of the munis, the way that they process their requests, and they have a long schedule of both how they charge individually for different types of records and how much those things cost. And so I'm expecting they probably have something that mirrors that from an email perspective, but I'm not sure. That's certainly something we could reach out and get to them and get to you by tomorrow.
Yeah, that's through the chair, Mr. Fleckenstein. Thank you. That would be helpful. It just seems to be wise to check with our city partners as we try to mirror policies that both of our separate entities have. Even thinking of the project labor agreements as an example, we try to mirror policies when it makes sense. And for ours to deviate significantly from the cities, something about that seems like it warrants further consideration if it does. But I don't know, and I couldn't find any additional information when I made a quick, honest attempt to do so. So that sounds good to me, and appreciate the opportunity to speak, Mr. Chair.
Any other questions or comments? I'm gonna ask Will, the other two board members. Did you have something?
Chair Hallman, maybe we should do you want to walk through these changes real quick, or does everyone comfortable with, has everyone reviewed them?
We can walk. I'm comfortable with them. Okay. Member Jacobs, do you want to go through them? The changes.
Mr. Chair, yeah, I've read the document. My primary question is regarding the information I've already raised.
Okay. So my question to you and Member Donnelly is, should we go ahead and pass this to the board with the possibility of working this out in a board meeting, or do we wait and bring it back to another governance meeting? And I would also ask the administration, is there any urgency to this?
Speak to that.
Yeah, so the urgency for me is just really a continued expense as we move forward. And so, we've got a couple of sets of board meetings to get through. If you were comfortable with us providing the information in Board Connect tomorrow, and then if you don't think that's enough, or we need to get more, we could have it on the agenda as an item, and we could always move it to the next meeting if we need to. I think there are options on that front to get you what you're after and still have plenty of both notice and ability to move it at the full board. But I yield to the will of the board on that front.
2 readings.
Yeah, 2 readings as well. So
I'm going to ask Member Jacobs and Member Donnelly, do you want to table this to another governance meeting, or do you feel comfortable voting it to the board and then taking action there?
Mr. Chair, if I might.
Member Jacobs.
Yep. I guess my request in turn is to ask those who are not on the committee for their thoughts, if they're okay with having this added to a meeting agenda with additional information forthcoming, or if they would feel more comfortable, and then kind of acting as a conduit for that combined opinion. Thank you.
You know, I kind of hate to see this policy being interpreted as cutting off an existing request. It might be appropriate to clarify in the policy it doesn't apply to any existing requests that were made under the existing, current policy. I wouldn't want somebody to feel they were getting singled out.
Yeah.
Right.
That's, it's not, so yeah.
Mhm.
Got that.
Do we have, I'm guessing we probably do have pending requests.
Oh, yes, there's always.
Always.
Yeah.
And just as a matter of practicality, once the board, if the board adopts these policies, then we have to do a bunch of internal publication notification to people before we turn that on, as well as write the code to make all of this happen. And so we won't do that until the board has approved this. So we'll do a bunch of pre-work, hoping that things get approved, but we actually won't do all the communication to staff. We're going to provide them with some time to know that this is coming, that sort of thing. And so it's not going to be an immediate, you're going to pass a board policy and then it will all be in place.
I'm comfortable putting it forward to the board. I'll pause for a moment in case a committee member wants to table it. Ms. Grant?
Member Wilson's doing that.
Member Wilson?
Thank you. I just wanted to say that I appreciate Member Jacobs bringing up those points because I think they're completely valid. In what feels like a previous life, I was a records manager, and so I understand the pain that you guys are going through, literally, and the conversation about how to archive or that entire conversation about emails has been going on for many years. So I know this is not something that you guys have come up with recently. I at least I'm making that assumption that this conversation has been happening for many years, trying to figure out how to structure it. So I appreciate the time that's gone into the information that you provided, but I feel comfortable moving it forward to the board based on the knowledge that if we don't have all of the questions answered that we want to before the next board meeting, or to have it on the agenda for the next board meeting, that we would push it to the following board meeting.
Any other questions, comments? Again, I pause in case anyone wants to make a motion. Otherwise, we'll put this to a vote. All those in favor of approving this to go to the board, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Aye.
It is approved and sent home. Yes.
Chair Hallman, and just a reminder, this agenda item involves two proposed revised policies, both the archiving email retention board policy, as well as appropriate use of ASD email accounts. It includes 3580 and 3523. So if anyone has questions on either of them.
Okay. That completes our agenda items. Is there any new business?
I don't know.
Hearing a delightful silence. Upcoming meetings are listed on the bottom of the agenda. Entertain a motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
Without objection, we are adjourned. Thank you.
So,